I've been sent to Coventry. And it's not just for Lady Godiva. In the 19th century, this was what made Coventry tick. Its watchmaking industry was world famous, and now there's hardly a trace of it left. Or is there? Time Team's history hunters have got just 48 hours to find out. In the mid-19th century, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, there were over 5,000 watchmakers in Coventry. Over the next 48 hours, we'll be giving 3 teams an antique watch and asking them to find out about the Victorian artisans who might have made it. So our history hunters will have to track down missing persons. It's a tough case. It's hard to believe that once over half the watches made in Britain came out of these buildings, so house-to-house inquiries won't provide easy answers. But our teams all have a connection with Coventry's watchmaking past that inspires them to rise to the challenge. Our first team live in Chapelfields, a remarkable area of 200 houses purpose-built for watchmaking in the 1840s. Their workshops were known as top shops. Now the one at number 2 Mount Street is Barbara Hollin's sitting room.
So in actual fact, you've been here just 2 years longer than I have.
Yes.
Barbara!
Hello, Tony!
It's so light up here.
Yes, it is. But I think my favourite time is when it's dark and you can see all the lights twinkling from the houses round about. It's really very pleasant.
Jan, what do you want to get out of this weekend?
Well, I've lived here for about 10 years, and I knew it was the watchmaking area when I came here, and I was intrigued by the buildings, and I just wanted to find out a bit more about the people and who lived here.
Is that the same for you, Sheila?
It is, Tony, yes. I've lived in this area for about 18 years, and I've always been interested in these houses. And I'm keen to find out more about what went on here.
Do you know anything so far?
Well, not a lot, except, well, there's some interesting writing on the windows.
Where's that?
There's quite a lot of them. There's one there and one there.
Oh, yeah. Edward Merry went
out.
to a supper on June 29th, 77, got drunk and spewed on his shirt.
Oh, well, trust you to choose that window, you know. There's more intellectual ones higher up.
Our second team, Rotherham's Precision Engineering, used to be Coventry's leading watch manufacturers. Managing Director Steve Fish cherishes dreams that they really were in the big league. Rotherham's made all these bits and bobs, didn't they?
They did.
And you're the MD of the factory?
I am for my troubles, yes.
So
yes.
what is it that you want out of this weekend?
I would like, out of this weekend, to finally say to myself that Rotherham's is either the oldest watchmaking factory in England or it isn't. And we've had a lot of conjecture about it is and a lot of conjecture that says it isn't, and I want to put it to bed.
How about you, Lee? Joining Steve is designer Lee Evans and model maker Jerry Elford. What is this thing that looks a bit like a gas meter, isn't it?
No, that's more than a gas meter. That's a mine disposal weapon. So what you do, you've got 10 seconds now to go.
Our third team live in another watchmaking area, Spon End. The Adkins family not only live in a former watchmaker's house, Father Malcolm is restoring his top shop into a museum, so he's hoping to get some pointers this weekend. Malcolm? Malcolm! Is this where they actually did the watchmaking?
No, this is our boat shop. This is where we restore boats.
So where did they make the watches?
Out here, up there. That's the top shop where the watchmakers operated.
And did they get in through the front?
No, there was a door here and some stairs up. So they were actually separated from the main house.
Yes.
And if you come through the back here, we've started restoring at the back, so we've got new sash windows in. We haven't taken the pebble dash off here, but that's all coming off sooner or later.
Malcolm has no qualms about roping in his partner Hazel, his daughter Helen, and son-in-law John.
I've never seen one before in my life.
You don't know much about this?
Not at all.
How long have you two been married?
3 weeks, so
3 weeks.
that's what I've been roped in to do.
So you're going to have to behave.
Yeah, exactly.
This is your dad's obsession, isn't
Yeah,
it?
you could say that. Yeah.
So are you going to get anything out of this weekend?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in Coventry, and I've learnt a lot about top shops, but never anything much in detail.
Behind each of these watches is a fascinating history of a vanished industry and a way of life. Each one has a story that brings us into the magic of watchmaking. Can our 3 teams find out who made the watch, who owned it, and where it was made? Setting the challenge is expert Alan Middleton.
This
Yes,
is the
sir?
Atkins watch, yes.
So where's the mystery?
Well, to start with, there's a name on the dial of this one, the name of Bonnickson.
Bonnickson?
Yeah, but that's not a mystery because you can soon find out about that. Now, the mystery lies slightly lower down. Beneath the name is a broad arrow mark.
Right.
This is an Admiralty arrow.
Just here?
Yep, right
yeah.
underneath there. This is repeated on the back of the watch, on the movement itself, where his name and address is. The Admiralty arrow is down there. And so you're in the wrong place to find out more about this.
Where have they got to go?
I suggest the Old Royal Observatory in Greenwich. It's the place to go.
Right, the Rotherham's team. This is their watch?
This is their watch here. And
A bit vulgar, isn't it?
It's very vulgar. Well, no, I won't say that. I won't say that at all there.
Why are you putting your gloves on?
Well, this one belongs to the museum in Coventry here, so I'm just getting into my curator mode.
And what's the Rotherham's mystery?
Well, this is a Vale and Rotherham watch with a fine gold dial. The mystery lies on the inside, where you have the portrait of Princess Charlotte, and the watch is hallmarked 1819. Wow. So the mystery is, why is she there, and what is her connection with Vale and Rotherham?
Okay.
Lovely.
Right, Chapelfields. Well, yours has fallen to pieces.
Well, let's just say we've taken it out of its case. That might be a better way of putting it. This is a watch which, again, we can find a bit about from the dial. It's a finely painted dial, and it has the name of AM Player and the date 1893 on it. But looking on the back of the watch, on the movement itself, there is what appears to be a Maltese cross in the very centre of the watch. So that's something for you to find out about.
We're off to Malta.
No, you're not. Not the holiday
If
programme.
they can go to Greenwich, we can go to Malta.
We've got an industrial dispute. We
Yeah,
haven't even
right.
started yet. You've got 48 hours to solve your mystery. Synchronise your watches, please. It's pretty peaceful in here now, but over the weekend, Coventry City Archive is going to become a hive of activity. We've got Coventry archivist Roger Vaughan on hand to help the teams with their research. Roger, presumably your archives are pretty extensive.
They are. We've got a good series of archives right from medieval times to the present, but we did lose some during the Second World War.
Because of the bombing?
That's right, yes. There was a heavy blitz in Coventry in 1940 and 41, and some records were lost.
But do you reckon you've got what our teams need?
I hope we have. I mean, I think we've got to remember that some of the watchmaking firms were very small and didn't leave many records, but I think although they'll have a hard time, they'll find something.
To find out if our teams can solve the mystery of Coventry's vanished watch industry, join us after the break. It's day one of our history hunt for Coventry's watchmaking past. And Malcolm and Helen are in Greenwich to get more information on their Bonnickson watch. Assisting their inquiries is curator Jonathan Betts.
How do you do? Hi, Helen. How do you do? This is the watch, is it?
Yes.
Ah, right. Well, I should point out the meridian line, yes, where east meets west. You're in the west, in the east, and I'm in the west.
Okay.
And we need to go west to have a look at the watch.
Yes.
So come with me.
Back in Coventry, the other half of the team, John and Hazel, are left to do the donkey work of finding out about Bonnickson's business.
So here we've got Norfolk Street, and here's number 16.
In Greenwich, Jonathan guides Malcolm and Helen through the Admiralty records.
And the serial number is 56985. And it has, in fact, got a government broad arrow on it, which is interesting because that means it definitely has an Admiralty history. So we will have something on that watch in our records.
Yeah.
Right, let me just look in our chronometer index, see what we have. 56985. Yeah, there are two cards here. Let's have a look. The first one here tells us that it has a carousel movement, which is very interesting. That's Bonnickson's own invention. One might have expected it to have that. I see that it has a Royal Observatory trial record too, which is interesting. What Bonnickson would have done is he would have taken notice of this publication, the Horological Journal. And
trial
in there,
of deck watches at Royal Observatory, Greenwich.
that's it. That was an announcement for people to send chronometers for trial here if they so wished. Now this is the year concerned, which is 1903 to 1904. And all of these are watches which were on trial. And look, there's Bonnickson.
Here's our one.
That's it. And sure enough, there's a little mark there saying that it has a carousel,
Right.
which we knew.
What I don't quite understand is the relationship between Coventry and chronometers.
Well,
why, you know, sort of, it seems an odd place to make chronometers.
let me show you what the relationship was. And this page basically says it all. And you'll see that a lot of these names, over half on this page alone, are Coventry-made watches.
Oh, are they?
There we are. There's Bonnickson, Chandler, who was in Leamington.
Yes.
Yeomans was Coventry, Newsom was Coventry, Fridlander was Coventry.
Right.
Now, they were, at this date particularly, the Coventry watchmakers were sweeping the board at Greenwich.
Yes.
We ought to check any patents which were taken out in his time.
In the archive, John and Hazel discover the reason why Coventry ruled the waves. It was due to Bonnickson's revolutionary invention, the carousel, which he patented in 1892.
Here we are.
Oh, here he is,
Bonnickson.
yes, yeah. So what's he patenting? This is in 1892, so that was quite early when he was living there.
What I've named a precision equalising carousel.
Oh, look how they spelt it. That was presumably his own
The
spelling.
carousel is a simple mechanism that enables the watch to remain stable whatever the position, very useful at sea. Bonnickson's watch was bought by the Admiralty in 1903. In 1904, it began its distinguished naval career.
Right, so this is the story of your watch, this page on the right here, Bonnickson 56985.
So July 13th, 1904, it went on naval manoeuvres.
Correct.
67.
That is in fact TB, number 67. That
Right.
is a torpedo boat.
Ah.
And soon after went back for repair.
It did.
Therefore.
It did. Yes, the torpedo boats were pretty rough.
Right.
It,
They
doesn't-
got bounced up and
It
down.
would have taken quite a hammering on a torpedo boat, and
Right.
it's not surprising that it had to go back to Bonnickson.
Malta.
Malta,
1918.
1918.
That's interesting. What that means is that throughout the First World War, it was in the Mediterranean.
Right.
And a watch like this is far too good to have been left in store.
Right.
It was clearly in use. Pity
So
it's
it's a-
not recorded, but
So it was a pretty, I mean, he was a good maker, Bonnickson.
absolutely, yeah. He was one of the greats of his time, a bit of a megastar, you know.
Right. Yeah.
The Chapelfields team with the AM Player watch start with the trade directories to see if they can find a watchmaker of that name.
It's as though these are going to be the nearest. This is 1894. That's an old one.
Yes. This is... Well, we have to just find the players.
Well, I've got one at 33A Mount Street, a dial painter, which would fit in with the watch and the flowers on the watch, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But the initials are AM, so they follow the lead to Mount Street and check the census returns to see if they can find a connection between Thomas the dial painter and an AM.
Thomas Player, head of the household, married man of 50, watch dial painter. Well, that fits in with the directory, doesn't it? Mary, his wife, aged... Not her then. 54.
And look,
Annie M, daughter.
Oh.
Single, 21, upholstery trimming worker.
No, that doesn't have too much to do with watches. Perhaps it was a present from her father.
Yes.
With the help of Roger and Fred, our internet expert, the team are able to identify the trademark, and it's quite a rare one, for the Coventry Cooperative Watch Manufacturing Society. But while this era was the heyday of the co-ops, very few records have survived, so our Chapelfields team needs some inspired sleuthing.
Looks as though their office, such as it was in Mount Street, next door to the Players, which
tying
sort of goes
together very
full
nicely.
circle.
34 Mount Street, Charles Lowe, Coventry Cooperative Watch Manufacturing Society Limited, S. Shufflebottom Secretary.
It looks very much as though everybody did one, and probably one only, of the processes that were involved in making the watch.
So you didn't just sit down on a bench and build a watch, you do a little bit and pass it next door to your mate?
Yes, that seems to be the general idea.
Yes.
Cap makers, engravers, our friend Thomas Player again, dial painter.
It would be interesting to find out a bit more about the area of Chapel Fields right at the beginning when it first started out and how it was planned.
We've got this vast map. I don't know.
Ah, be careful with the watch.
Yes, I'm getting it down.
Ooh.
Right. Where's Chapel Fields?
It's here.
Oh, it's really very separate, isn't it?
Yes, it was put right out on the edge because the centre of Coventry was so overcrowded.
Look what I found.
What's this?
Oh, yeah. It's a scrapbook that was compiled at the time. Unfortunately, it's the obituary of Charles Shufflebottom, or both of them.
He was the
who
guy...
he was the secretary of
the co-op.
Yeah, and if you look at the write-up on his funeral, you find a couple of players, T player and J player, and possibly all the people that worked for the cooperative, because they would have gone to his funeral, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, and it says here the pallbearers were from the co-op, and there were lots of members of the co-op attending.
Yeah, so we couldn't get anything better than that, could we?
So presumably T player and J player were members of the co-op. Oh look, it says here the deceased, having been a secularist, no religious service was held either at the church or at the grave. You get this idea that there's lots of rather sober people determined not to have a religious service there. Maybe that's how they all were in Mount Street. So what now?
I think we have to go back to the area and have a look at this.
Back to Chapel Fields?
Yes.
Right,
See what it looks like on the ground.
Don't take your Bible. Chapel Fields began in 1846, when 200 building plots were laid out. It was intended as an estate for watchmakers and became one of the most important centres of the trade. Most of the watchmakers lived in the house and carried on their business out back in the top shops. The player watch was made over 100 years ago on Mount Street, just a stone's throw from where Barbara lives today. Helping the team pinpoint the exact location is buildings expert George Demidovich.
35.
And that was the registered office.
34.
33.
No, 33A.
And here's George.
We're pleased to see you,
Have you managed
George.
to sort it? Because we're having trouble ourselves.
The houses have been refurbished over the years, so George is looking for exterior evidence of former top shops.
Right, what can we see now? You can see the mark of another window.
So you think that might be 33A?
So it's possible that that's 33 on the front, and this is the workshop 33A.
This is where the players lived and where Annie lived.
Oh, right, yes, that would make sense.
Yes.
And we say that it was Annie who owned the watch that we've been looking at.
And this is 35, where we noted the Coventry Cooperative
registered office.
And the Shufflebottom
Shufflebottom,
connection.
the 35.
Yes.
Okay, I think we've sorted it as best we can. Yeah,
They could have passed the watch across to have its face painted.
The Rotherham's team with the Princess Charlotte watch find their research brings them into the early origins of the firm.
We've located the VR trademark, which says it's a Vale Rotherham watch. So definitely it was produced by the Vale Rotherhams of Coventry.
This is interesting. I've just found a reference to Princess Charlotte. Princess Charlotte was born in 1796 and died in 1816. She was the daughter of George IV, and she died in childbirth, so she was 19 years old. Well, it says here, her death caused great grief throughout the entire nation. Now, that watch was dated
1819, so it can only be a commemorative watch then.
There you are.
Ah, ha 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 ha. 1819, in October, Prince Leopold, the widowed husband of Princess Charlotte, and afterwards King of the Belgians, passed through Coventry and was presented with the freedom of the city. So, okay, there's a Belgian connection.
Helping the Rotherham's team is local historian Dr. Carl Chin.
I think we're making some headway, Carl.
Where have you got to?
Well, we managed to find out that the VR trademark was a Vale Rotherham watch.
Right.
And it was presented to Prince Leopold in 1819.
That was to commemorate the death of Princess Charlotte, who actually died in childbirth.
And we've also got a record in the history of Coventry here, saying that in October 1819, Prince Leopold passed through Coventry and was presented with the freedom of the city. So we're assuming that the watch and that are connected.
Why do you think a firm such as Vale and Rotherham would have been involved in making a watch of this standard, this quality?
Oh, I think the prestige of being able to present a watch of that quality to royalty would have been phenomenal. I mean, its marketing potential was, even then, also huge.
They may have cracked who owned the watch, but finding out about all the craftsmen who worked on it is complicated. Vale and Rotherham were large employers, but there are few surviving records. However, a parliamentary report on the state of watchmaking in the same year as the watch suggests it was produced in a factory system. And while there's no evidence that Rotherham's was the first watchmaking factory in the country, it appears to have been the largest.
And what he's basically saying is it seems to be some abuse of the apprentices, or there seems to be some working relationship there that was just not right for the employees. So that says to me, well, what sort of owners were Rotherham's itself?
Yeah, how was...
I'd like to find out, were they a genuine family business? Were they exploitation of the workers?
Among the apprenticeship records that do survive, they find a person indentured to Rotherham's.
Now, these are quite important, these indenture documents, because they tie an apprentice to a master, and they enjoin upon the apprentice that he will behave in a certain way. For example here, during which term the said apprentice his masters faithfully shall serve. Their secrets keep, their lawful commands everywhere gladly do. He shall do no damage to his said masters, etc., etc. Yeah. Well, William Bray is signing it on behalf of Daniel Beamish, the youngster, and Daniel Beamish is a charity child.
Which means?
Well, look here, son of Daniel Beamish of the city of Coventry, deceased. He's probably an orphan.
Yeah, an orphan.
He's in a charity school, and they're seeking to get shut of him to an employer.
Well, it gets back to maybe our original point. I mean, was it exploitation?
Yeah.
You know, poor houses.
Yeah.
We may never know if Daniel Beamish worked on the Princess Charlotte watch, but chances are it was someone just like him. The next stage of Rotherham's quest is to identify exactly where the watch was made. All the documents confirm that it was the former factory in Spon Street. In 1776, Samuel Vale leased the Spon Street premises. Another document dated 1782 shows the company expanding.
That's the site of the original factory.
Over there.
Yeah.
The Rotherham's team decide to visit the original Spon Street factory to see if any traces of the watchmaking past remain.
It looks by the site of these buildings that they're actually a series of workshops.
I believe that would be the case, yeah.
Where he's probably had his workers living downstairs and then grafted in the top shops above, not being a proper factory as such.
Yeah. I think you'd be right there.
It might be well worth having a look around the back.
Just in case something else has survived from the earlier period.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
There don't look to be a lot left of the old...
Yeah, there is. There, look. Those windows, they look like they're windows that were in the top shop.
Yeah,
very so earlier.
Yeah.
They do, actually.
Yeah.
The prestige of making a watch for royalty must have worked, because from the Spon Street site, Rotherham's dominated Coventry's watch trade for a century. By 1899, they employed 700 people and produced 100 watches a day. But it's bad news for Steve. Despite a careful search of the archives, there's no evidence that the company began in 1750, as all his stationery claims. Today, Rotherham's watches are collector's items. There are no watchmakers left in Coventry, but John Scattergood makes a living repairing antique timepieces.
Do you get more of a thrill when you're working on a Coventry-made watch?
Oh, it's always a pleasure to work on something local.
Yeah.
Because I suppose in a way you feel more part of history.
Yeah.
You know.
Almost touching the people that made it.
That's right. Yeah.
John, when people talk about the jewels of a watch, what do they really mean by that?
They're talking about the bearings, really, that the pivots run in. And the idea of having them jewelled is there's less friction. So you get a smoother running, you get less wear. If it's running metal to metal, you'll always get more wear than metal to jewel. The red ones are the jewels. All these gears that I'm putting in now are the parts that actually run the hands.
It's a delicate part.
It is.
Last couple of screws?
Yep.
How do Rotherham watches compare to some of the other ones?
Well, I think they're very good. I like Rothman watches.
Why?
They're a nice looking watch.
Yeah.
They're a very sturdy watch. So in other words, the pivots are good, solid pivots. You know, everything is nicely made. The plates are a good thick plate.
Yeah.
And the one thing I really like about them is the looks.
Yeah.
Right, here we are. These are the great Harrison marine timekeepers.
In Greenwich, the Bonnickson team can't tear themselves away from the High Temple of Time, where they learn about the significance of chronometers. Before the 18th century, ships used to be literally lost at sea because they couldn't measure longitude for navigation. They're delighted to learn that their watch is descended from the famous Harrison timekeepers that solved the longitude problem.
That's right. This is H1, which was built in 1730 by the great John Harrison in an attempt to win the great £20,000 longitude prize. It didn't perform well enough, and he moved on to his second machine.
Why wasn't it good enough?
Well, it went on a trial in 1736, and it just didn't perform quite well enough at sea.
Right.
And Harrison knew what to do, so he improved its design. And this is H2, as it's known.
With a proper winder.
That's right, this one has a proper key. That's that one wound. This didn't perform well enough either, but was gradually improving in timekeeping accuracy.
Right. What sort of accuracy are we talking about here?
We're talking about 10 to 15 seconds a day, but in order to win the great prize, Harrison needed to design a machine that kept time to within 2.8 seconds a day.
Yeah.
Now, a watch like that is easily capable of it, but these large machines, unfortunately, were not. Now, this is H3, which Harrison was sure was going to win him the prize. It didn't, but he spent 19 years of his life trying to make it do so. What eventually did was what we think of as the most important watch ever constructed in the world, and that's H4, this wonderful silver-cased, very large pocket watch. This is, in fact, not only the first practical marine chronometer, but the first of all precision watches ever made. And in a sense, it's the sort of granddaddy of watches like your Bonnickson there.
So here we
are.
Here we have it.
Great-grandfather.
Even with Roman numerals.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And that was made in the house behind me.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
In 1884, as an international conference, Greenwich beat off the French to secure its position as the home of the prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude. But it was the coming of the railways that changed our relationship with time. So you've got all these watches in circulation. Yeah. How did people know where to put their hands? Why didn't one lot set them at 10:05 and the next lot at 10 past?
Quite simply because there was a master clock in London at the Greenwich Observatory. It was put up in 1852 and it brought in Greenwich Mean Time, or as many people called it for many years, Tony, railway time.
Why did they call it railway time?
Well, I think you've got to imagine the situation before the railways came about. There was no standardised time. So a clock in London could be saying at 1 o'clock, but in Newcastle it'd be 1:15. In Glasgow it could be 1:45. And so a railway system couldn't work on that operation. They needed everybody to have the same time on their clocks and watches.
So the old idea of the rhythm of life and people having their own way of operating time in their own villages and towns, right out the window.
It disappears.
This explosion of demand for watches during the Industrial Revolution created employment for watchmakers like the players in Chapel Fields. Our team have managed to track down a direct link to their watch, Mrs. Hill, a descendant of the maker.
The watch was my grandmother's. The dial was painted by my great-grandfather, Thomas Player.
Ah, so it was Thomas.
Right. Because we're still not sure which house they lived in. They lived in 33 and it used to be called Lindale.
Lindale.
Right. And I have something else to show you. These are 3 miniatures that he painted.
Oh, they're beautiful. And who are they of?
That's my grandmother, Annie Margaret.
Oh, right.
Player.
That's the Annie Margaret.
Oh. Yes.
She's very pretty.
That was Sarah.
Yes.
And I think that was another sister.
Gosh. Yeah.
So that's our girl.
Yes. So we've actually seen her now.
At the end of day one, the Chapelfields team have met the owner of their watch, the Rotherhams now know their factory isn't as old as they thought, and the Adkins family have found that Bonnickson was a watchmaking megastar. But there are more surprises in store for our Time Team history hunters. Day two of our history hunt, and Malcolm and Helen arrive back in Coventry to be reunited with the other half of their team.
That's cost you about 150 quid. No, we've come out from the station.
Oh, that's a relief. So how'd you get on?
Yeah, really great actually. We found out that Bonnickson sent the watch down to Greenwich to be tested. We found out it was sold to the Navy.
And Bonnickson's a star.
What do you mean he's a star?
Well, on the Navy test, he came top in all of them. He was really good. He's a good man.
Hazel and John have finally managed to tear themselves away from the archives.
All right. How's it going? All right?
Okay, it was great, yeah.
So this watch was made in that little house?
Which way? Oh. Well, there's not much of this left, is there?
No. Lots of these houses are like this. They've had all their details taken out.
What about through here? I can't really imagine apprentices working in here, can you?
Well, I can, but the space is still there.
Downstairs, John and Hazel are once more into the documents. They check the house deeds and come up with a revelation. Bonnickson sold the house to the Rotherhams.
Of the 4th of May 1920, between Bonnickson himself and Hugh Kivett and Ewan Rotherham.
He actually owned the building then, and he's selling it to Rotherhams.
It looks that way, yeah.
Here, we've got the original door. That's an original door.
Great.
And it's quite small.
It's much smaller than everything else in the house,
That's
isn't
right.
it?
Not meant to be a connection between this room and the rest of the house for regular use.
Because the staircase would have been down there where the bathroom is now?
That's right, yes, yeah. Heavy lock as well.
And now all that's left of the original is the door.
That's it. Sad, isn't it?
Yes, there it is. The red one here. That's our locally listed one. We put on Coventry's local
If
list.
Malcolm had been around 100 years ago, he could have chatted to Bonnickson over the back fence. Now, to help him summon the ghost of watchmakers past, he's drafted in buildings expert George for advice on restoring his own top shop.
What I don't know is how the working arrangement was and how the bench was.
And it would have been literally underneath the window, about this height, with the watchmakers working in the row and seated.
I think we've got some indentations here. It looks as the boards are worn here, there.
Oh, yes. There's two. Yeah, well, their favourite positions. They would have worked in fixed positions.
Where they wanted to.
They would have established themselves in a particular position and would have always worked there. So, yes, one there.
Wonder if we can work out how many people.
Another
one here.
Another one there.
Another one here. Wonder if we can work out.
Oh, yes. 2 more feet here.
And how many people? So
yes.
six people working here.
6 workers, yeah.
It's lots of people for.
Maybe not all at the same time, not always.
Right, yeah.
In Chapelfields, inspired by the success of tracking down the AM player watch to her own street, Barbara now wants to know about the watchmakers in her house, number 2 Mount Street.
The next one says, Mrs. Keyes died on January the 14th, 1875.
They're able to draw on a unique historical record, 19th century graffiti carved into the window pane.
The wife of the owner or something.
And that's the
oh, yes.
Merry one. That
Edward Merry.
Yes. We know this bit. Got drunk and spewed on his shirt.
Right.
How are you getting on with the documents?
I'm deep in George Rice, who was bailing himself out of financial...
While Jan and Barbara gather evidence, Sheila gets stuck into the deeds to see who owned the house. She discovers it was a watchmaker called George Rice.
So, do we know what this man Rice did in the watch industry?
Afraid we don't. It just says he was a watchmaker.
Oh, that's a pity. Where do you think Edward Merry came in? Do you think he was an apprentice that wrote this on the window?
I think it's a reasonable assumption that anybody who's writing on windows like that is an apprentice.
Oh, so...
And the boss's back is probably turned.
This one says Potty had 4 days booze
October the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th, 1895. And then again, January the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, record booze.
Oh, there must have been a drunken lot in this place.
Yes, here, look, Edward Merry, Spon Street Ward, watch jeweller.
In the archives, they prove their hunch about Edward Merry, the drunken apprentice, by consulting the indenture books and trade directories.
Here we are, look, 1871, August the 7th, that was the date of the indenture, and it's George Rice and Sarah, his wife.
And I've got him here. Look. Rice George, watch jeweller, 2 Mount Street, Chapelfields.
What I've just noticed here is that Alfred Rice, son of George Rice, watch jeweller, was apprenticed to his father at the same time.
Oh.
On the same date.
Ah. So they were in league, the
So
of
two
them.
boys together,
Yes.
egging each other on.
Yes. One the boss's son.
They're always the
There
worst.
are two different handwritings up there, you know. One is much better than the other.
Yes, writing about...
Potty. That's
Yes.
the potty writing.
What an exciting place Chapelfields must have been. From its origins as a greenfield site in 1846, it grew into a distinct community. Once, 1,000 watchmakers and apprentices worked in the 200 houses. There were 102 pieces in a watch, and each top shop specialised in one craft, from dial painting to case making. They also knew how to have a good time. You can really imagine old Edward Merry getting tanked up in here and then going home and spewing all over his shirt.
Can't feel the atmosphere.
Well, they did like a drink, the watchmakers, because they worked that hard in little cramped conditions, and when they went out, they wanted a pub nearby. That's why there's so many pubs around here. They get all toughed up in the billy cock and the bowler hats, in the best clothes, and they'd enjoy themselves.
Yeah. It does make it really exciting that we're walking along these streets now and we can really feel the history here and really it's come to life for us.
And I think what we need to think about as well is how busy the streets would have been.
Yes.
Because you'd have had all the different makers of watches, engravers, gilders, finishers, all grafted in their workshops at the back. But it would have been a hive of activity on the street, because little lads would have been running backwards and forwards, handing the pieces on until they were finished.
So maybe not quite as respectable as it is now.
I'm not answering that one.
It's very respectable now.
The Rotherham family achieved the height of respectability. 4 generations dominated Coventry watchmaking. Industrialists like Kevitt Rotherham and John the Younger helped found the Coventry Technical Institute. They were also prominent sportsmen. In the archive, the team discover photographs of the factory from the turn of the century.
Looking at the side view there, that'd be the only thing that would remain as we see it.
So that would be the gate that we were looking at?
Yeah. Oh, Jerry, look at these. Look at these. Fantastic.
Wow.
Right?
Now look at the windows. Aren't they similar to the windows that we saw in the
the
building?
top shop downtown, yeah. Isn't that small space?
Must be. And look how long and narrow it is.
Yeah. Ah, no, there you go. Engineering at its best.
That's a health and safety nightmare, isn't it?
And you see how we'd laid them out there. I mean, that is, you know...
It's not a wide room, is it?
No. But there's, in that small room there's probably 50, 60.
Yeah.
Remarkably, there are no public clocks left to commemorate the Rotherhams in Coventry. Their only municipal legacy is by association, the Godiva clock, made by a former Rotherham's apprentice. E.T. Loseby set up his own firm in Leicester and in 1852 patented an ingenious device for this Coventry landmark.
Well, it is an extraordinary turret clock because it's unlike most of them. You've got 2 separate mechanisms on the going side. I mean, here's the enormous wheelwork up here and the weights that, big heavy weights that drive it. But separate to it, inside this box here, unfortunately hidden away like all the best bits inside horological things, hidden away there is a precision astronomical regulator, one of the most accurate devices that could be made. And
So this is the heart of the machine?
That's the heart of the machine. And every minute this ticks away and releases the main mechanism over here. It's doing it now. And that's what turns the hands. Hi, Brian. Call again. Amazing.
What do you think?
I'd rather not say.
I've got someone for you to talk to.
Is it to do with the cricket connection?
It certainly is. Come on, we haven't got much time.
Let's go.
But the team find out the Rotherhams did leave their mark.
This is a photograph of Hugh Rotherham, 1861 to 1939, who was the son of John Rotherham, and he played cricket for the club, but he also represented Warwickshire and England. And it was his family that put the money up for the ground when it arrived here in 1900.
A great legacy.
Yeah.
An England cricketer, a Rotherham England cricketer.
Well, I've been playing cricket now in Coventry for 30 years, and what I didn't know is that he was an England cricketer. And secondly, I didn't know he founded the club as well. Marvellous, marvellous.
By the turn of the century, English watchmaking declined, beaten by the Americans and the Swiss, who successfully mechanised their industry. Luckily for Coventry, car manufacturing took its place, and some of the canny watchmakers diversified into the new industry, including Bonnickson. In 1912, the Danish genius patented a speedometer used on early motorbikes. The team check it out at the Motor Museum.
Oh, here's one.
Is it?
Yep. Bonnickson time and speed meter, made by Rotherham's again.
Bonnickson wasn't the only watchmaker who transferred his skills to the motor vehicle industry.
We know these watchmakers had wonderful skills. They were nimble-fingered. They could do complicated things. They were men who did things precisely. And those were the kinds of abilities that were required in the new industries of Coventry, sewing machines and bicycles. People like Humber, who came to Coventry to make bicycles, then took those skills on into the car-making industry.
Each of our teams have discovered the magic of watchmaking on their doorsteps. For the Rotherhams, it's a history of an innovative company. The Adkins know all about the Danish genius Bonnickson, who flourished in their own backyard. And the Chapelfields team have uncovered the colourful characters who once lived in their neighbourhood. It just shows there's more to timekeeping in Coventry than the Godiva clock.
And for more information on this week's hunt, just visit the Channel 4 website. And next Saturday at 4:10, History Hunters delves into the lawless past of Britain's border region.